Hello, welcome to Spink Insider, the podcast where history is valued. I'm Tom from the Stamp and Historical Document Department. Here I'm with Ian Shapiro, my colleague, to speak about historical documents. There's quite a lot to cover today, but I thought we'd just start by giving an introduction to the collecting field, what the documents are, why they matter to us, who collects them. You've been in this field for a long time, Ian, haven't you? So
yes, I have. I've been collecting things like this since I was probably a teenager when I discovered the magic of owning something that probably wasn't a huge amount of money, but directly related to the great figures of history. And that passion and enthusiasm remains, and it's something I like talking about and possibly converting collectors into expanding their knowledge horizons.
Yeah, that's right. I remember when I started at Spink in 2018, you'll remember, I knew a little about stamps and a little bit about documents, and I was surprised in a way at the history you could acquire relatively affordably through historical documents.
Yes, I think the collecting in this field is very diverse, and if one looks back through the centuries, the collecting of autograph letters is something that was well defined in the time of Samuel Pepys, who was one of the great collectors. And many of the collections from those days have survived almost intact in institutional libraries, the Bodleian Library, the British Library, and they serve as a tremendous eye on the world as it was at the time. Because when you look at, let's say, autograph letters, and I know we're going to talk about historical documents, autograph letters, and other forms of autograph material, nothing can be more dramatic than holding in your hand a letter as opposed to a document, but a letter written by somebody who's contributed to the progress of the world, because I often say that this is the closest that you can come to the thinking of an individual's mind. And one has to remember that when one looks at these letters, none of them were written at the time possibly with an eye to the future. They weren't written in order to publish a book or their diaries the following year. One or two exceptions, and this is probably the closest, again, that you can come to an interpretation of current events as were seen by a diverse range of people.
Yeah, well, I had studied history before coming here, and I remember possibly on my first day being handed a group of Sir William Ramsay letters, I think, by our colleague Neil, to describe. He's someone I knew a little bit about, but I learnt so much more from reading the physical thing, the first-hand document, than I ever could have hoped to from textbooks and so on. It was exciting. I remember wanting more, and the more things I saw, the more I realised, well, actually, you discover so much more by reading the first-hand document, the primary source. As
it is thrilling, thrilling from the point of view of looking at handwriting, place from which these letters were written, the notepaper that was used. Earlier letters were written on handmade watermarked paper that can tell you so much about where the paper was made, and it really is the history of the written word in the most personal way imaginable. And I think one can enthuse from young upwards, enthuse people to appreciate actually holding something that comes from another era. And it is of that era. It's not a book published years later. It's of that time. And the more exciting the individual to whoever is looking at this, the more enthusiastic collectors become in wanting to build up collections, whether it's in the arts, science, politics, history, royal families of the world, rulers of the world, particular parts of the world. I mean, can concentrate on the history of South America through historical documents. Look at Africa, look at Australia. Certain parts of the world can't predate certain centuries because there was no written communication in those parts of the world. But I think if we look at the history of Western civilization, a lot has survived from the 1200s in the written form. And that really moves not so much into the letter area, but into the historical documents, because people weren't communicating, writing letters to each other in the 1300s. There are very few personal letters of that period.
Well, you've touched on something there that I think we need to drill into a little bit more and define our terms. What do we mean by a historical document? Is it any piece of paper that was written 5-10 years ago, even a scrap from a document 100 years ago. It's not quite, is it? We're talking about things that bear in their own right a historical significance and have survived for various reasons.
Yes, and absolutely. And if you look at something, let's say, from 1,000 years, it's not going to be somebody's shopping list. Mm-hmm. We're going to look at religious documents, land grants, things of that order, possibly with the wax seal remaining of the sovereign, something giving things legal status. Most of the things that survive have a legal status to them. And you take the Magna Carta, for instance, a document that's changed the world, and people today can still go and view it, and view numerous copies of it in various institutions throughout the world. I think this is really the exciting thing. So historical documents, yes, in context, each one of them adds to the history of the period that we know. Even though the content might not be revolutionary, they do place society in a certain time perspective as to what exactly was going on and how society was ordered in those days. As I said, you're not going to get personal letters from the 1300s, but what we do get is a tremendous insight into how the world evolved into the world we know today.
That's right. And when we talk of historical documents, we don't always mean letters or documents either, do we? I mean, for example, here with us today is this fantastic photograph.
Yes.
They can be paper-based ephemera from any period of history that, as you say, reflect something about that moment in time and evoke something to a modern audience.
I think so. And, when you also look at this, the written word is prime for those periods, but once printing became more accessible to the general population and people could buy books, that too would, I think, be interpreted as a historical document not of a unique kind. Books are not unique unless they are unique, but historical documents, each and every one of them, will be different as to the personalities involved, the people mentioned, the places. So there is a uniqueness to these that adds to one's understanding, but also they don't necessarily have to be valuable to add to our knowledge. Lots of people say, oh, these markets are very inaccessible because it's old, it has to be valuable. No, not necessarily so. I mean, one of the fortunate things about our countries is that huge archives have survived, and survived intact in many cases. Many of them have come onto the market. So it's not an inconceivable possibility that you can sit at home with something written in the 15 and 1600s that has come out of a family archive, because families have sold collections over the years, and you then have a glimpse into the history of that family or the country house or the stately house. And I think also looking at the survival of these things, somebody once said to me years ago, how's all this survived? And I think when we look at the history of the United Kingdom as it is today, we haven't had a massive dislocation of population, such as one seen on the European continent. I mean, the major upheavals we've had here, probably the Civil War. And then you've got to jump quite a long way into the bombings of World War I, World War II, where archives were destroyed, but we have not had the dislocation of population that we've seen throughout Europe. And there are many stately houses and institutions today where the collections have remained intact for centuries. And I remember the thrill of going to Longleat House many years ago and being shown around by the Marquis of Bath, and he had letters in the collection addressed to Longleat by Queen Elizabeth I. And these had not moved out of the house in 500 years.
Yeah.
And that is the thrill of seeing these things. And of course, one can't buy those, but there are plenty others that one can find that are available if that's a period of history of Elizabeth I that enthuses one.
Yeah, no, you're right in describing it as an accessible market. There are various avenues from which you can approach it at various sort of budget levels, and whether you want to do photographs or letters of any different period, it's all available to you, even if a lot of it is in institutional collections. Some of it is on the open market.
Very much, and a very defined marketplace. The dealers who specialize in this, the auction houses, they're private people, very accessible. And I think if one does get involved in this market, not only is one able to learn an enormous amount through physically handling and owning these things and doing the research, but it's a hobby that brings great friendships to the fore. And these are lifelong friendships between collectors who have similar interests. And I can attest to that. Really, it has changed my life and enhanced my life by being in this world.
Yeah, my interest really starts with the crossover between the postal and the manuscript side of things, and where you draw those lines, if the lines need to be drawn indeed at all. It's one of the privileged positions we're in Spink, is to be able to see both sides of the paper that we're dealing with. I brought something along with me today that you'll know very well, Ian, which is a haste post haste inscription, which of course is an item of great philatelic and postal history importance. This is an inscription that the addressee would apply to a letter on the address panel to indicate its importance, usually concerning matters of government or state, and that the letter had to travel by the fastest possible means.
It's almost like an express letter, really.
It then became the express
letter. Post. That was probably in the yes.
If we were really to get into it, it would become sort of a special delivery, express delivery,
yes.
As and when the Royal Mail, as it was introduced. But at this stage, this service existed for official mail. It's collected by postal historians, but of course the contents are historically interesting. If you think, when was this letter dated? 1640, from John Ackland at Column John, which was a royal garrison house in Exeter, to Sir George Chudley, which is endorsed for His Majesty's special service. The contents probably would be quite good, aren't they? So how do you collect this? Do you collect it as a postal thing? Do you collect it as an item of historical significance? Or I think there should be a case for both. And that's
there is a case for both. And I think when you look at something like this, the survival of the address panel is something that postal historians really love, because you can see from whence it has come and where it is going to. And I think the address panels generally tend to survive on these early letters because it essentially was one piece of paper, one sheet of paper. There were no envelopes in those days. So it's one sheet of paper that was then folded into envelope size and then sealed with a wax seal. And generally, again, the wax seals can survive intact. The endorsements on the back that indicate possibly date and time of arrival. So many of these entire letters can be subject to a lecture on their own.
Well, absolutely. I mean, in this case, they're discussing a meeting that's to be held tomorrow. We don't know the contents of that meeting, but they must well have been jolly important for the sort of arrangements to be made overnight, essentially. With a bit of research, someone might be able to find that out, and that, it's a real sort of carrot on the stick. But we've sold haste post haste endorsements in the past that have reference to the Anglo-Dutch Wars and matters of true historical significance.
Yes, one must also remember, on His Majesty's affairs, for something of this age, this relates to Charles I. And poor chap, 9 years later, he had an unfortunate experience in the banqueting hall in Whitehall. So, and the start really of the Civil War. So 1640?
1640.
This is a very significant decade that this country was entering at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk a little bit about this very fine selection of letters and notes signed by Nelson, of course, a key figure in British naval history and Napoleonic Wars. And here, from the same collection, we have 4 very notable letters that I'll talk you through. So, for example, here, this is the earliest in the section, 1794, March 1794. This is written from the Agamemnon off Bastia, which is a battle famous in Nelson's history for illustrating his ambition and his confidence in battle. He went into this thinking it would take 10 days, I think, and the siege took eventually 6 weeks. Their resources were much depleted afterwards. It was a success, but as with the majority of Nelson letters and items one finds, you usually get a sense of the man, I find. With the ones that we've sold in the past, we've had letters where he speaks about drinking ass's milk in the morning for his courage and spirit. Here we have an example of his stubbornness, his military zeal, and his sheer desire to win in battle, I suppose.
Yes, so we need to remind you who the enemy was. And Napoleon, we were fighting Napoleon, and this went on for quite a long time in various parts of the world.
I'll read you something from the letter, because not only is it from this famous battle, but he speaks of it as well. He says, "We're still blocking up Bastia, the attack of which has been given up in a most extraordinary manner. What might, if it had not have been deemed a most impertinent observation, viz. Bastia, from a place I had found on much closer examination than our General Dundas, could be attacked to our great advantage. I wrote to Lord Hood requesting an engineer and artillery officer might be sent to examine. Today I have been with them, and their report is most favourable for an attack." So he's expecting it to be really quite simple. "I have so close blocked up the place that 1 pound of coarse bread sells for 3 livres. If the army will not take it, we must by some way or other. General Dundas has quitted the command, differing in opinion with Lord Hood." So again, you get a real sense of what the battle was like for the British naval fleet at the time from just reading the letter. Not only is it exciting because it originates from the time and the place, but you learn something reading from it, which is,
well, it is. And how does he sign his name there?
Well, here he signs Horatio Nelson.
Correct. So if you're looking at from an autographic collector's point of view, and you were interested in collecting Nelson, what would you want? You would want a letter signed Horatio Nelson. You would want a letter signed, written with his hand, that eventually he lost. And you can see the obvious difference in the handwriting.
Well, you bring me to my next
letter between the one and the other. And therefore, if you are a keen collector of Nelson material, you would certainly, at the minimum, want one of each.
Well, and here we are. So our next letter is dated 1797, the 4th of September. In and of itself, not a particularly notable letter. He's writing to John Palmer, who, among the stamp enthusiasts of us, will recognise the name as being someone who was crucial in the development of the British posts and setting up the mail coaches. So a nice, again, bit of crossover between the postal history and the manuscript side of things. But more importantly, as the keen-eyed among you will observe, the document on our left is in a very neat script. The document on our right is in a very, very shaky hand. And that is, of course, as you alluded to, Ian, because Nelson had his better hand blown off in Tenerife in the Battle of Santa Cruz. This is a really, really early letter following the amputation. I've dated it to 41 days after the amputation. Actually, 41 days after first writing with your weaker hand, the script's fairly legible, isn't it?
Very much so.
But a very dramatic moment in British naval history. And as you say, you would want one in both hands and signed in both manners.
Yes.
As a collector, and this is something you can look to do as a collector of this area. Our third is dated 1802, 27th of April. The interesting thing here, a number of things, he's announcing the death of his father in a remarkably perfunctory manner to Alexander Davidson, who was a close friend and aide of Nelson's. And he simply writes, "My dear Davidson, my poor dear father is no more. God bless you. Signed Nelson and Bronte. And that's as far as it goes. So that's interesting in and of itself. Beneath that, remarkably, is a postscript in Lady Hamilton's hand. To have the two hands on the same letter is most unusual.
It's absolutely thrilling to see that. And I think the juxtaposition of those two handwritings on a single piece of paper, and it's written from where? It's written from Merton?
This letter is from Merton, you're right.
Well, Merton was the house that that Nelson shared with his mistress, Lady Hamilton, and together they had a daughter whose name was Horatia. It scandalized British society because Lady Hamilton was married to Lord William Hamilton, and he also lived at Merton. So lots of historical precedents for world events and personal affairs of many famous people. But to see the two handwritings, one below the other, is something absolutely exceptional. It epitomizes the personal side of history and the dramatic side of history, and again how society looked at these situations. Merton was inherited by Lady Hamilton after Nelson died. It's just outside London, and eventually she sold the property. And to see that name, to see Nelson's name, to see Lady Hamilton's handwriting, which was so different to his, I think again is one of those thrilling moments when you look at this piece of paper and you can say, my goodness, there's a huge story here.
Yeah, well,
and there is. And the way he's expressed the loss of his father is almost the way that one might have sent a telegram in later days. Yeah. It's very staccato. It's very brief. It's very possible that the way he's expressed himself there to Davison was the way he wrote maybe a dozen letters that day in a similar vein. Well, and it's hurried.
Nelson would not actually attend his father's funeral, sending Davison instead.
Well, that's interesting.
So it gives you an insight into how that relationship might have been. What's also interesting, I think, is that Hamilton's postscript is very revealing of the nature of the household, how things are run. You have this very brief, pithy note from Nelson, and beneath which I'll read you what Lady Hamilton says. It's quite hard to read because she dashes it off with no punctuation whatsoever. But it's essentially trying to sort of temper this very brief message. It reads, Lord Nelson wishes your friend, the Chancellor, to give common of his father's livings. Could you not speak to him about his death? He has wrote to his lordship. He begs me to write you this in haste, ever yours, and unsigned, but very clearly in her hand.
It is. I find, when I look at that and you start thinking, are there historical analogies? If you look at that, and we know it exists because it's here on the table in front of us, but can you imagine if you saw something similar from, let's say, Napoleon and Josephine? If you think of the great romantic stories, the great love affairs of history, some of which were unholy, some of which were frowned upon, some of which were true love affairs. So let's take that and you extrapolate further. Let's say we had something bringing it to more modern times. You had something written by Nicholas and Alexandra, the last Tsar and Tsarina of Russia. What would that say? Or the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Again, the great love affairs of history that have intrigued people for decades and decades and decades. And here you've got a piece of paper that epitomizes all the drama surrounding the love of one man for a great society beauty, and he soldiered on. And no matter what anybody thought, and books have been written about this. So to see the real thing before us, I think, is enormously exciting.
Yeah, I think it's known as well that Nelson's father wasn't all that approving at first of this relationship, although I think he did contribute some money towards the purchase of Merton.
Yes.
So all of that subcontext on one sheet of paper is really quite remarkable.
And all this while Lady Fanny Nelson was up north somewhere. So there's a big story here.
There is indeed. Which brings me to the last of the Nelson documents we'll talk about here. This is a very intriguing document indeed. It's a small, what we would call autograph note, in that he has indeed not signed it, but very clearly in his hand. There's a few things about this. I'll read first of all what it says. It's dated 1797, the 8th of December. reading, "An officer desires to return thanks to Almighty God for his perfect recovery from a severe wound, and also for the many mercies bestowed upon him. December the 8th, 1797, for next Sunday." And you'll see it's in this wooden frame and then glazed. The wood is said to have been taken from the mainmast of HMS Victory, one of his ships, of course. And there are a few interesting things about this. It reveals to us, one, how religious Nelson was, but also, two, quite how long it took for this wound to heal. We know from his diaries that the loss of his arm caused him considerable pain for a number of months, and it wasn't until December that he really started to feel the same again. And this we can see as him giving his thanks to the divine intervention for making him feel one again, let's say. One thing I'd like to talk about with this, though, and one thing that vexes many of the industry's specialists and indeed collectors is provenance. How do we know this is in his hand? How do we know its history from his hand to us now? And why do we believe that this is indeed made from the mainmast of the Victory? So I'll illustrate to you a few things here about this frame. So one thing we like to look for are notes of provenance. Try and not knock everything over here. But I'll need to read out the list of names here because it goes for quite a long time. So in fact, the original framing is revealed when you take away this back panel, which can sometimes be a little fiddly, but we're off and away. So we look here for contemporary notes and even sometimes collectors' stamps, which are perhaps more commonly found on art collectors might be familiar with things like this. Document collections of a certain period do have things like this, and they help us enormously. So I'll read a number of the notes that we have on the back here. So one note reads, "A notice sent by Lord Nelson to the curate of St. George's, Hanover Square." So that would have been the curate of his local church, written with his left hand and framed in a piece of the Victory. So this is our first indication that, yes, it's from him, and it is indeed from a piece of the Victory. We know by the age of this piece of paper and the style of the writing that it must be contemporary, or we can only believe that it should.
It looks absolutely of its time.
A further note reads, I think this is the one at the foot, "The frame is made from the mainmast of the Victory and was given to my father by a medical officer on hand at the time of Lord Nelson's death. Signed P.G. Greville." A further note still reads, "I hand this to Sir W.A. Fraser of number 88 St. James's Street, P.G. Greville, son of the Reverend J. Greville." This was Joshua Greville, the incumbent at St. George's. So we're starting to see a line of provenance here from this medical officer to the church, all the way back from Nelson's hand. And again, we see the blue sticker here of Sir William Fraser, which further evidences the fact that it fell into his hands at that point. The frame's then been rebacked again with this piece of wood and a book plate attached to the back, which is of Sir William Augustus Fraser of, I'm going to mispronounce this, Lediclune and Morar, with a manuscript note reading, "Lord Nelson's note handed to the incumbent of St. George's, Hanover Square, bought of his son by Mr. W.A. Fraser." So I think we've tracked it there through at least 3 hands, beyond which the trail goes dark until it appears in auctions, presumably from family members. I mean, we see here that Fraser, of course, is a Scottish family name, and of Scottish nobility. The furthest I could trace this back in terms of auction appearances with 2005 at Lyne and Turnbull in Scotland.
Well, there we are.
So,
but it's absolutely incredible to see this, because how many people really undo the backs of a framed item? And what you've just revealed is something absolutely exceptional that you very seldom see with items of this vintage. And who would have expected there to be anything underneath? And it does show the importance of maybe undoing the reverse of old frames, because there's a well-known story that an original copy of the American Declaration of Independence, which is worth an untold fortune, was in fact found underneath the back of a frame, and it was used as backing paper at the time. I'm not suggesting for a moment that every framed item from 1776 is going to have one of those in it, but it just shows how lucky somebody can be. But what has been revealed here is almost what I would call a Tutankhamun moment, because you take that off, expecting what? Expecting frayed paper. And yes, there is frayed paper underneath, but my goodness, the extent of the notations, the provenance, and the sense of history that is being revealed is something absolutely extraordinary. So much more exciting than when you look at it as it is, and although it's exciting enough, but I think we've uncovered something tremendous here.
Well, as we're talking about Nelson, it only feels right to speak about his main adversary, Napoleon Bonaparte. I mean, Napoleon and Nelson, and the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars are an enormously popular collecting area for a number of reasons. I mean, the world is entering this new sort of world order following the abolition in most dramatic fashion of the French monarchy, expanding empires, stronger and stronger naval forces, and also the fact that some of the more important documents have survived, 2 of which are here with us today. We pick up the story really with the French Revolutionary Wars and Napoleon Bonaparte's increasing influence and ambition. He saw the British naval forces growing in power, and by dint of that, their imperial prowess growing and growing and growing ever more. And one area in particular of being particular political importance, North Africa, and its use for access to Asia, and the trade routes that were plied by the British. And so Napoleon saw this and thought, aha, I know how to get a foot in here. To North Africa I will go. So in 1798, Napoleon landed in Alexandria with 13,000 men, with the view of disrupting all of this, and moving to one side the Ottomans and the British naval influence in those parts of the area. And at first he was quite successful. He advanced on the coast very, very quickly, landing in Alexandria as he did. He captured Cairo, moving up into Egypt. He seized El Arish, Gaza, Akka, Jaffa, all the way up until he eventually became unstuck and had to beat a retreat back down through Syria into Egypt. But what we have here to start with is the most remarkable document, dated, 1799, the 26th of February. This is the document here on our left. The most incredible thing about this is that it's dated and located in Gaza, which, as far as we know, is the only known letter signed by Bonaparte in Gaza. He was only there, I think, for a total of 3 or 4 days. I think it was 3 on the way up into Syria and 1 beating a hasty retreat back down. So he didn't have all that much time to write while he was there. But in this letter, he requests payment to be made for the efforts in towns previously seized. So he even mentions them by name as Katia, El Arish, and Gaza. So this is a sort of a campaign, a living campaign document of Bonaparte's progress through Egypt into Syria, of extreme significance when you consider the moment in time then and its context in today's history. We see now that it's forever been a hotly contested area. It remains to be today. And at this time, the powers in play were the French, the Ottomans, and the British, vying for power there. He eventually, as I say, after a bloody battle in Jaffa, in which 2,000 Ottomans were killed, and more shockingly, 2,000 prisoners of war were executed in what was, even then, I think, a hotly debated moral decision. Convention at the time had been to treat prisoners of war with care as much as possible, feed them. But when you have so many, a ruthless Napoleon Bonaparte chose to kill them.
Well, an army marches on its stomach.
Yeah.
So how many stomachs do you fill?
But it was after this, and I think during the Battle of Acre, that Napoleon had to turn around, following the combined efforts of the British Navy and the Ottomans. Napoleon, in fact, went back to France and appointed, first of all, I think, Kleber as the general in command of the forces. And on his death, Menou took over. Menou is an interesting character. We know that he married into an Egyptian noble family, renamed himself Abdullah Menou, and converted to Islam, probably for political reasons. But he continued the efforts in Egypt. And here what we have is his original draft proclamation to the Egyptian people, written in Arabic. It would have been printed in French and Arabic, I think, but this is his thoughts on paper, and essentially a kind of printer's draft in a way. This is how it should read. And so in Arabic, at the top here, we have the slogan, if you like, of the Republic: liberty, equality, as you see in all the Republican documents, but written in Arabic. But the contents of the letter are almost sort of blood-curdling in the rhetoric, the political rhetoric that he puts out as being Republican and forceful and aggressive, and the statement of intent, really. This is the French saying, we're here now, forget about the past, you pay our taxes to us, or else, essentially. I'll read you some of the more dramatic moments. He signs off with the threatening message: I want to warn you that if you are disloyal to the French Republic and follow the path of the villains against us, our revenge will be swift and terrifying. By the dearness of Allah and sacredness of his Prophet, all your wrongdoing will turn against you. Remember what happened in Cairo, Bulak, Al-Mahal, and Al-Kobra, I'm probably mispronouncing some of those, and in other Egyptian towns. The blood of your fathers, brothers, sons, wives, and beloved ones was flowing like rivers. Your houses were destroyed, your money was taken, and your possessions perished in fire. Why did these bad things happen to you? It's because you listened to the villains and they misled you. Let it always remain a good lesson to you.
I mean, that is very dramatic. And how's he signed it? He signed it using his Arabic name, hasn't he?
He does. He signs it Abdullah Jacques Menou. And aside from the chilling and sort of aggressive elements of that, it's remarkable for its political rhetoric, really, that he's using the religious aspects of the country to persuade them of his wishes, essentially. The kind of thing that puts your hairs on end, isn't it?
It is, and when you look at something like this, you talk about a historical document. Well, this is really laying the groundwork for French rule over Egypt, according to the French way. And not many years after, the guillotine was being wheeled out in Paris, and there was no guillotine in Egypt, I'm quite sure. But the veiled threats against the population are there to really toe the line, because this is the way forward. But if you aesthetically look at this document, not only is it enormously significant to see how he has signed his name, but there's the most marvelous impression of an intaglio seal at the end. And that really sets the tone for what is in effect an official document. And with this being an original draft, again, how much closer can you come to Menu? And he no doubt held this in his hands because he signed it. So you take yourself back from 2025 to when
1800.
Yeah. So you go from 2025 back to 1800. The drama that would have surrounded the issue of this proclamation amongst the general population would not have been insignificant. And if one goes back to history books and you start reading about the consequences of the issuing of this proclamation, one can really get a sense of time and the effects of it. But here we are sitting with the original document that really is slightly blood-curdling in a way, but this is the way you conquer territory. And maybe they had no option. Well, this was the way they did it. So Napoleon went home. He left his commanders, or his whatever one wants to call them, in charge, and he would have awaited messages back to say how it's going. But that, in the form of an official proclamation, is totally different in format to the document that is signed in Gaza, which is a hastily scrawled instruction for the payment of various amounts, and signed by Napoleon. And it is known that Napoleon didn't particularly enjoy writing letters. He enjoyed dictating letters. And this would have been dictated, I would imagine, and then he would have signed it. There's no intaglio seal on it. The signature in full Bonaparte is there for all to see. Again, when you look at the signature of Bonaparte, he was such a great administrator that many of the documents and letters that survive are in fact just signed NAP. So to see the full signature on this is, again, incredibly significant.
Absolutely. It's history borne out in front of us, isn't it?
It is. I think, and given what turmoil has gone on in that part of the world for centuries, this all in a way brings the drama to life in more ways than one could ever imagine. And I think that's the excitement of owning and researching things like this. Because once you acquire something like this, it inevitably leads to the building up of a research library. And they probably illustrated prints and magazines and newspapers of the time that report on the goings-on. But it's the owning of a primary document, such as this, that often leads collectors into building a collection around the subject.
So we've spoken a lot about how exciting it is to collect in this area, what there is that's around to be collected and why you might do so. You and I have good memories of things we've sold in the past. I'm going to show one now that is on loan to us from its current owner that we sold, I think, in 2022 or 21. Yeah. One of the more exciting things that came in. I think this had been in the family for a number of years, and I received a simple email one day saying I have on my wall a document signed by Queen Elizabeth I. And I said, well, that's very nice. Can we have a look, please? And we were able, thankfully, to sell this in the end. It went from one home to another appreciative home to a collector who will cherish this. But it's one of history's more famous and recognizable autographs, I think it's fair to say,
yes,
with these intricate scrolls beneath the Z and above the B and beneath the R of Regina. It's what you might term an iconic thing, isn't it? this document in particular is of special interest because it concerns the safe housing of Mary Queen of Scots, who at the time was fleeing Scotland and was being essentially put up by various British nobles on the favour of Queen Elizabeth I. So at this point, she's writing in 1569, the 16th of September, to the Earl of Shrewsbury, George Talbot, who was keeping her in his place, Sheffield Castle. But between the years of 1568 and 61, Queen Mary had been moved from Tutbury Castle, Wingfield Manor, to Chatsworth and Sheffield Castle at varying times, probably once or twice, even thrice, a place, back and forth, as they were avoiding the people wanted to capture her back. When I described this, I put this in the context of the other letters that are known in institutional collections, surrounding the payments that would have been authorised to the earls, the lords who were keeping Mary Queen of Scots. And it paints a real picture of the time. And it's one way of looking at these things. Yes, you own the document in front of you, but in effect, you own the history around it as well. And the letters that form part of the correspondence that aren't available to you become part of the story that you own. That was a really exciting moment.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think if one takes a closer look at this on first glance, fairly innocuous looking thing, aside from the very dramatic signature of Queen Elizabeth I, the things that come to mind. A, the document is signed at the top. So this is the difference between a document of state and a letter. The monarch is signed on the top of the document, indicating that it's signed, quote, by the Queen. If Elizabeth I had been writing a letter, she would have signed at the tail end of the letter. So there's a clear distinction between documents and letters. And this is very clearly a document concerning something terribly important. But I think, having placed it on this table, you can see the thread of history before our very eyes. Because Elizabeth I, who died in the early 1600s, remained the only Elizabeth I until Elizabeth II ascended the throne in 1952. And what do we have standing behind it? We have a studio photograph by Dorothy Wilding of Queen Elizabeth II, both signing Elizabeth R. The thread of history is absolutely incredible when you look at this. Of course, there was no photography in the days that Elizabeth I was signing documents, so people only knew what she looked like through the coinage and contemporary engravings, many of which might have enhanced her appearance. But when you look at a studio photograph of that quality and significance by one of the top photographers of the time, it's an accession photograph. It's of the young Queen, and it's signed below on the mount Elizabeth R. and dated very soon after she came to the throne. So there's a link between these two items in quite an unexpected way. Elizabeth I would never have expected photography to exist, and the late Queen, gazing upon a document signed by one of her predecessors, is also, again, a most thrilling moment.
So on the table, we have what we might call a historical document, in that it is a document of state, as you've described it, but so is this. It's a photograph, but a document of some kind, a historical document that is a photograph. And I think you've got a few further studio.
Yes, I mean, we have a most amazing range of studio photographs coming up in our 16th of September sale. And I just want to walk you through a few and tell you what the significance of things are, both in the history of portraiture and also what one can collect. It was only from about 1860 that the public was able to have themselves photographed for a fee that was inconsequential, the equivalent really of the penny black. When one could send a letter from 1840 at a cost of a penny, you could from 1860 have your photograph taken in a studio for not very much money. While we're talking about the late Queen, we were very privileged as part of a collection that came in to look at a pair of photographs taken by Marcus Adams in the 1930s. He was one of the most famous children's photographers in central London. He had studios in Bond Street. And these two individual photographs are of the then Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret Rose. They were taken to the studios in 1935 to be photographed. What is so exciting about this pair of photographs is that the little girls, the future Queen was then 9 years old and Princess Margaret was 5 years old. They have both signed their names under the images. I've never seen a pair like this before. What makes this exceptional is that the Queen, the future Queen, has signed her name Lilibet, which was a family pet name. And she continued signing personal letters, family letters, and family Christmas cards, Lilibet, until the last. Whoever is eventually going to own this pair will be in possession of a world treasure, in my opinion. And here you see the power of studio photography, where the equivalent of digital enhancing was performed by the photographic studio, where there's a huge element of shading and the use of natural light and enhancing of features. It was very easy to do this, but it was a huge skill. And the final result is something exceptional. And these photographs have been much published, much seen. And the Royal Collection Trust published a book on the work of Marcus Adams, in which these photographs appear. So that is something terribly exciting and is part of the story of collecting history.
Absolutely.
If one moves forward, and again, you take presentation photograph frames. Over here, we have a leather frame with the Prince of Wales's feathers at the top, and in it is a professional photograph of the Prince and Princess of Wales, signed below Charles and Diana. Now, these were things that were never commercially available. You couldn't go and buy that. These are presentation photographs that were given on state visits. They were given to members of the royal household, retiring diplomats, politicians. So they do come onto the market through deceased estates and various other ways. But again, framed photographs like this do play a role in placing the lives of significant individuals into some kind of context. So that is rather nice. Looking at photographs, and this again is one of Princess Margaret, a colour photograph, beautifully posed, but when one looks at this photograph, which she has dedicated and signed on the mount below, the students of royal history will be able to tell you the background to the tiara that she's wearing. It's a famous Baltimore tiara that she was given when she married Lord Snowdon, the diamond earrings. So it's a history of jewelry, it's a history of court jewelry, the history of private royal collections are epitomized in this very graceful image that we see before us. And looking at what happened to this Baltimore tiara, somebody might ask, it was sold by a major London auction house when Princess Margaret's effects came onto the market after her death. So there again, a photo can tell an enormous story. The other photograph that I do want to show you, because it is again very significant, is a colour photograph placed on a mount showing the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret at a ball in Scotland, possibly at Holyrood House, and it is signed below by the two ladies in the land who could sign themselves Elizabeth R. The Queen Mother, because she was Queen Consort to King George VI and was entitled to sign herself as Elizabeth R, and of course the late Queen, as sovereign, signed herself Elizabeth R. It is also signed by Princess Margaret. That again reflects a great moment in the history of our nation as to the structure of society. Studio photography, I think, is a marvelous thing to collect. We look at photographers such as Cecil Beaton, who captured the royal family in a certain way, and his successors. A very defined way of collecting history. Their photographs don't necessarily have to be signed. They very often are by the photographer. So an area I'm very fond of and very encouraging of collectors.
Yeah, thank you. That's some remarkable imagery for one thing there. But as you say, points in history, which brings me really to sort of wrap things up with a question, I suppose. what do these things mean to us now when we have them in our home? Why does one purchase them, accumulate them, collect them? For me, it's because it brings us as close as one can be to a moment in history that you might be close to. But you collect as well, Ian, don't you? Well, why
I do. I think that owning and researching and acquiring these things involve a passion and an enthusiasm. And before we close off, there is something that I want to share with those who will be viewing this. Somebody once said to a very prominent collector, "What is the most prized possession in your collection? What is your favorite item?" And no collector can truly answer that, but he did. And the response that he gave is something that resonates all the time. His favorite thing and the most prized thing is the item that he last acquired. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks. Thank you so much for listening and watching wherever you get your podcasts. This has been Spink Insider. Do be sure to like, share and subscribe, and stay tuned for more further content like this.